wooden bowls with a router and not the lathe. Now, first off, I'm not hating on the lathe at all. Love wood turning. Wood turning is amazing. But a lot of woodworkers, at least hobbyists, might not have a lathe. Or, like me, you have a smaller one where maybe this is the biggest size bowl you can do. And so this video is just going to walk you through how you can pull off a bowl, a dish, with a router. Now, there's a lot of possibilities here. You can see a lot of different patterns, a lot of different designs, and so I'll be walking you through all of these different variations. Feel free to use the timestamps below to jump around for what you're looking for. But it is a fun project. If you're in the cutting board game and you've done lots of cutting boards, this is a great next step and really minimal tools. You might see a bunch of different things in here, but really with just a router, you know, a hand drill and a sander, you really could pull this off. So, wooden bowls with a router. Check it out. First up, wood selection. So plenty of options here. You can get just, you know, a standard, just a solid piece of walnut here or the Santos mahogany. It's a great look, right? Solid wood. For that, you could get yourself a big slab. So I got some big, you know, 12-inch wide pieces. This is already 8/4, 2-inch thick. If you're able to find lumber that's thick enough, you know, go for it. So both of these bowls or trays, they started off as these slabs. You could also take that species and then you could do a glue up and you could do cut it on its edge. So I could take, you know, like this sapele here, and I could cut my strips. I can make a really, really thick bowl like that. That's an option. That's what I did with this cedar here. So this is actually cedar. It's not a hardwood. Still looks great. You could just do a face grain glue up. So I have these boards and kind of like a tabletop. You can just glue it up together. If you're going to do it like that to make yourself some wider stock, just take into consideration the growth rings and alternate just to account for wood movement. But that is an option as well. However, I can't help myself. I like to make cutting boards. So this is like my edge grain style cutting boards. I will show, you know, a little bit of the steps here, but if you're looking to do something like this, make sure you check out my Cutting Board 101 video. All the steps on how to mill and get a great glue up with something like this. But this is just, you know, like cutting boards. It's great for offcuts, but you can get some really cool patterns. So that is another option. So I'm going to walk you through basically how to do a glue up like this really quick, and then how to do, you know, the cedar one, another option. If you're not interested in that or you don't need that, skip ahead, check out the timestamps. But those are some options. I will also briefly show segmenting, a little bit of segmented ring, how you can add that, or just adding just a quick little maple top. So lots of options for wood. Be creative, have fun with it. But here are the steps how to do a glue up. If you don't need this, skip on ahead.
All right, so first step is you want to rip your boards down. So I'm going for about a 12-inch diameter bowl. So these pieces are about 12 to 14 inches long. And now I'm ripping down and cutting the pieces about 2 3/4 inches thick. Wide. So when I flip these boards on their edge, I'm gonna get a bowl blank that's about 2 3/4 inches. So you wanna just rip down all your stock. And then this is just a traditional, you know, edge grain cutting board. So I do recommend checking out that video. There's a lot more steps on getting the glue up and milling your wood. But here I'm just getting varying thicknesses. You do not need this drum sander you see me using. Lots of other steps for this, but you just wanna get a bunch of different widths to get those cool patterns and then start playing around with the patterns. So I'm just using a variety of species here, and I'm just constantly measuring to make sure that my bowl is about, you know, 11 to 12 inches wide, and it gets some really cool patterns. So here you can see all these hardwoods in the front. Over there in the back left corner you can see the cedar. Looks rather nice. And now it's time to glue it on up. So I just used Type Bond 3. It's a water resistant, waterproof glue, but I'm able to batch out and do 3 bowl blanks at the same time. So here I have all my strips. Just in between each set, I just make sure I don't include glue, but I can get 3 in the clamps at the same time. And just nice even pressure. You don't need to over tighten, but I do recommend using plenty of glue. It's relatively cheap. I know it feels like a waste, but you'll really regret it if you're missing it in spots later. Here you can see I got that blue tape again on the clamp to help with cleanup, but I got two in the clamps here. you know, really, it's just uniform pressure. You don't need to kill it and just like go to town squeezing too hard. Just nice even pressure. Really 6 hours will do it. For drawing, you can let it dry overnight. And then I'm using just a paint scraper. Just a paint scraper here to get these glued off, these dots of glue that have dried, just so I have a level surface for flattening. Now I am using a planer here. You do not need a planer for this project. The planer just helps me get a nice flat surface for the router, but you certainly could use a belt sander. You could use a handheld sander. You just want to clean up that glue, get a flat surface for the router to use the circle jig. And so you just need a nice flat surface, but the planer does help, gets it nice and clean. You get kind of a view of what that's going to look like, the patterns and all that goodness. Once you got it nice and clean at the planer, you do want to square off the edges. You're trying to make some square blanks. So I'm just using the miter gauge going backwards. This was a tip I got from Scott Morrow Designs on Instagram. It helps me with the height. If I had this on a sled, I probably couldn't cut it just on the sled. So backwards miter gauge, get it nice and clean. Eventually I do cut these again to make them square, but you can see a nice clean bowl blanks. You can see some other just single species. Got all your woods. All right, one other option is segmenting. So I have some choice woods here, some nice curly maple, wenge, and Paduke, and I'm just getting them all to level thickness. Usually you can buy them, they're all 1 inch to begin with, but just level thickness. And I do recommend using blocklayer.com. It helps you with all the math of segmenting. There's plenty of videos online that walk you through these steps, but it gave me, told me how wide to cut my pieces, what my angle was. I went with an 18 segment piece, and so for me that was 10 degrees. I have a really good miter gauge, and it really locks in the angle for me. But there's sleds, there's all sorts of jigs online, so make sure you check online if you want to get after segmenting. Just wanted to show another option here. Once you have your pieces cut, do a dry fit. So using some hose clamps here, you can just kind of see what it looks like. I went ahead and I did sand my edges. You just want to be really careful here. You don't over sand and lose that angle. So just really careful with some sandpaper on a spray adhesive on a flat surface. And then again, I'm doing another dry fit just to make sure I didn't ruin it. And then add your glue. So some more Type Bond 3, just in between each steps. In between each pieces, and then again those hose clamps. So, and there you go, right? So clamp it on up. Once you're done, you're probably gonna have some gaps. This is my first time I had gaps. You can see that little black line there. I filled that with some black CA glue. Sometimes you'll see some gaps, and so CA glue and activator really is your best friend. That Starbond stuff is amazing. And so once it is filled, you want to flatten it. So you can just use sandpaper. You don't need a fancy tool. I do have a fancy tool. Drum sander is amazing, so I'm flattening it here. But once it's flat, then you can glue it up on top of your other piece.
All right, so segmenting is a great option. Just take some extra steps, but it's a great way to not waste too much material and just to add some extra height, right there, gives a little bit thicker bowl. Another option without messing with all the angles is just a standard face grain glue up. So here I just have 2 pieces of inch thick maple, and I'm gonna add it to this 2-inch walnut. So it's just gonna give me a thicker bowl. And with a face grain glue up, really important that you do account for the rings. So here I've marked out, it's kind of like a U shape here, and then on this side it's a reverse. You want to flip and change the orientation just to take into consideration wood movement. This is a major issue, like if you're making a tabletop. This is a smaller bowl. I'm going to remove most of the material, so it's probably not an issue, but I just don't want to take any chances. And so you just got your glue up, surface it, and then just glue it on. And there you have a layer. If you don't want to waste all the material in the middle with the router, you could drill a hole, use a jigsaw, a coping saw, or a scroll saw to remove that material. But then it's just a great way to add some layers. So here it's just a nice classy rim to the top. You could do multiple layers if you wanted that effect, but face grain glue up, just another option.
All right, so another glue up. Once you have that top piece surfaced, throw your glue down. Again, you just want a good healthy squeeze out. You could use some table salt here to keep the piece from sliding around just a little bit. That is a tip. but just a nice healthy squeeze out all the way around. Same thing with the segmented ring. So if you take out the material in the middle, it's a standard glue up. You can see where the glue comes out, but you do want to add a piece in the middle of the same thickness. We'll get into this in a little bit, but that's going to be necessary for the router.
All right, so it's a router bowl. So you got your router. Now you need a circle cutting jig. For this project, I just went ahead on Amazon and I just bought one that's already made for me. So a lot of different options online. Plenty of different companies make these. You could make your own. I just went with this one because the mounting holes are already drilled for my router. And then there's all these pivot points so I can get really precise circles. If you wanted to just make your own, there's plenty of videos online. Check it out, make your own jig. You just take your router and drill the holes, mount it to a piece of MDF, piece of plywood, and then you're just going to drill out your different holes based on how far you want to go, right? So you could have it here, drill the hole here, there's my pivot point, and I can make my circles. So you could certainly make your own. Just what you'll see here, I'm just using this one here. You're gonna need a bit, right? So for this, we're making bowls, so you want it to be a deep bowl. So this cute little 1/4-inch bit, it's not gonna go very deep. So I went with actually a 1/2-inch shank, this big spiral upcut bit. Just make sure you get a bit that's long, that you know, along with the router you can go a little bit deeper. You could get a collet extender where you can make it just a little bit longer. That's an option as well. But anyway, I'm using this spiral upcut bit. Links to all this stuff is down below if interested. But anyway, circle cutting jig. Let's route out some circles for these bowls.
All right, so first step, go ahead and set the depth on your plunge router, and then just go ahead and mark your diagonal lines. So you want to find the center point of your blank, mark it with an awl, drill the hole. It's a 1/8 inch hole, at least for this jig. And then I have this 1/8 inch brass rod that I put through. Using this one, I found my pivot point. I found the size circle I want for the outside, trying to maximize how much I have in this piece. And then you just work your way around. And so once you have your outside circumference, then mark it again and then go for your interior. And so it's up to the look you want. So I do recommend not having the walls of your bowl being too thin. I went a little bit thicker on mine just to be extra cautious, about 3/4 inch thickness. You could go thinner. Again, you just feel what you want to feel. But I want to just look at the clamping setup again. So I have my center pin, I have my whole setup here, but I do have some scrap wood on either side, right? So you want to have that so you don't actually accidentally go into your clamps. You want to have a good clamping setup like I have here. I do recommend hanging that cord up high so it doesn't get in the way. My basketball hoop, or if you do in the shop, you can, but I did it outside, so the mess is outside. Anyway, try and hang that cord if possible. But really important again is do have that depth stop set. So here you can see where the bit plunges. I have at least a 1/2 inch on the bottom. So just take that into consideration. Make sure your depth stop is set, but make sure you give yourself a good 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch on the bottom. All right, another option is, there's some cool jigs out there just to kind of see, what size circles you can fit. So you can play around with that. But if you want to cut the interior circle first or the outside circle first, really it's up to you. I probably would recommend doing the outside first just so you know how big of a bowl you really do have. But as you're working your way around, this is cedar, this cut a lot easier. Usually you want to do just small passes, right? So this is a spiral upcut bit. It's a good bit, but it's still, it's gonna leave some marks. So you want to go easy, don't put too much strain on the router or the bit. So nice light passes, and then just keep plunging your way down until you hit that depth stop, and clean it out with some dust collector or shop vac, and you see your holes. And so again, you can see I have the different thickness of the walls, but just kind of play around with it. Again, so back here I found my center hole, and I'm putting in the peg. So I do recommend with this, I did 19 bowls with this big batch, and so I would recommend having an extra, those 1/8 inch brass rods, just the ones that this jig came with. I kept pulling it in, it got stuck in some of the really hard stuff, so just having some extra on hand in case you bend it. But you get a really nice clean look right here. And so there you have it, just using the circle cutting jig. And so now you have this spot in the middle that you're going to have to hog out shortly. But really quick, want to look at that segmented. So I had that center piece in the middle. So if you've removed the middle stuff, you still need to have a part in the middle, right? A point in the middle with which to use the router, right? So I have my center point. I kind of figured out what was center, and then I'm using the router just to kind of clean it up, and I have that nice ring. And this is an option for those of you who really don't want to waste extra wood in the middle. That is a great option.
All right, so once you've routed out the circle, you have your exterior and then the interior, the sides, you need to hog out the middle. Now you could just use the same bit that you used earlier. You're just gonna have to switch to a different base plate. I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. That's what I'll be doing. But I do recommend, some people will just go to the drill press. And so here you can see I went to the drill press and I hogged out most of the material, and then I'll come back later and I'll clean it up. But if you don't have a drill press, there's other options. You could just, again, you could use that same bit from earlier just to get it all out. You could use a bowl and tray bit. It's got a flat bottom, rounded edges. You might need to use a collet extender to get it deep enough. But this is what I'll be doing to clean up after the drill press. But again, you don't need all these extra bits. You could just use, a $20, flattening bit, or just a straight bit. Just take into consideration, this is hardwood. That's a lot of strain on the bit if you do it all on the bit. So just, options. You could also do some power carving. I love my little Arbortech turbo plane to carve it out. But at this point, time to remove the interior stuff. So let's go to the drill press, drill some holes, and next steps.
All right, so first up, set that depth stop. Just like with the router before, make sure you're not going too far in your passes. And so, with the Forstner bits, which is a great way to remove the material, there is that point. And so you are gonna leave yourself a little ridge, but make sure you just don't go below your final depth. So you don't have to keep going deeper and deeper. So this is what it's going to look like afterwards. You see all those holes, and we'll clean that up with the router bit, but there is a little ridge there that gets cleaned up with the router. And so this is just the step with a drill press. And so the drill press is a great option for removing material. And this is actually a practice that's been done for a long time by woodworkers, for decades with template router bowls and trays and such. And so it's just a great way to remove material. Most woodworkers have, a drill press. If you don't, there are those other options. I needed to upgrade. I upgraded to this great Rikon variable speed drill press that, no belt changes, minimal belt changes. Great unit, had the power. I went through all of the hardwoods, no problem. Now, some people, were a little up in arms on Instagram. They thought there was a lot of waste here and you're just wasting all that material. Well, that's what bolt turning is. You're wasting all the material in the middle anyway. But if that is a big problem for you and you feel like, philosophically that's such a waste of wood, I am going to repurpose all of these wood chips. You could try and resaw this piece, at your bandsaw. I don't have a bandsaw with a big enough resaw capacity. These are about 12 inches, and if you have that, you could try and re-glue the pieces back together. And there's some other options with that, but I think this is perfectly fine. You still get a beautiful product, but yeah, you do have to remove a lot of material in the middle, and so it is what it is. So I've removed the material in the middle. They look beautiful, honestly. At this point, you're like, wow. These are looking awesome. But yeah, there is a lot of wood chips. Just, repurpose it for different applications. Once you've done this step, you do need to clean it up. And so once you're going back to it with a router, you're going to need a bigger base plate. Otherwise, it's going to dip in and it's going to be unsafe. So I'm just using some plexiglass, some acrylic here, and you just matching up the holes and finding the holes. So I took my old base plate and I kind of lined up where the holes are. This isn't too difficult. Just takes a little bit of practice. One thing is I needed some screws that were a little longer. Fortunately, that jig I got, it came with a bunch of extra screws for mounting, and the screw on the right is the stock one, which is just a little short. The one on the left came from this kit. So you're gonna just need some screws that are a little bit longer to account for the thickness of the plate. You don't have to buy the jig to get longer screws. I'm just saying, if you had it, they're there. And so you drill your holes. You're gonna have to do a countersink hole just to make sure the head of the screw sits below the surface. Definitely, again, you wanna just maybe test this out on some plywood, but you just gotta match up your holes, and then, a nice big circle Forstner bit in the circle, in the middle, a big circle for the bit to go through. and then just go ahead and tighten it, screw it on down, and you got yourself a big plate. And so then you pull off that, then, oh, plexiglass, it works. You could use plywood for this. It doesn't have to be plexiglass. It's just nice to be able to see through. Now that I have this little sled, this extra long plate, you see how it can sit on the rim of the bowl, and that really helps. So now I'm using that bowl and tray bit. It's got a nice round edge. It cleans up the bottom rather nicely, and I'm just doing light passes just to clean up the marks from the Forstner bit. Also to clean up the initial passes earlier. And so what's great about this, it's got a bearing on it, so it's not going to dip into the side of my piece. It's nice and clean, and you can clean up any edges or any imperfections with sandpaper later. But it really does make quick work of it. Get a nice clean bottom. Here's a look at that bowl bit, nice rounded, and that's how I cleaned up the bottom. So went to town on all of these, and this goes super quick once you've done the drill press. If you just use the bowl bit, it just would overheat the bit. You'd have to wait in between, especially if you're doing a big batch like I am. If you're just doing a one-off, probably not a big issue, but makes quick work of it. So that base plate, nice and big. I made mine extra big for some future projects, but you just need it big enough to rest on the rim of your bowl. And once you get them all nice and clean, you can take a look at them and be like, whoa, these are looking great. And you can be proud of yourself and proud of the wood. I mean, honestly, it's all about the wood. I mean, there's a little bit of skill involved, but it's really that wood grain showing through. Okay. Now go ahead and pop off the edges just using the bandsaw. My cute little bandsaw here works just fine, and you just want to cut really close to the wood. Don't leave big chunks off to the side because you're going to be using a flush trim bit. If you leave a little bit too much on the edge, that's just too much strain on the router bit. And so it's so narrow at the bottom, right? You only have ½ an inch that you're actually cutting. And so it's just quick work of it. Just work your way around, trim off the excess, and then flush trim time. So flush trim bits, there's so many options. I wish I had a compression bit, but this is a great flush trim bit I use for a lot of applications. Little spiral with the bearing, and now you're just removing that bottom material that was just that little hair, maybe 1/8 of an inch left from the bandsaw. So satisfying, nice flush, beautiful. Get it nice and clean, and so you're removing this material. So whatever flush trim bit you want to use, go ahead and work. I do recommend spiral bits. A spiral bit or a compression bit, you're just going to get a cleaner edge, and it's going to save you. But you're still going to have to sand, right? So here I'm using a benchtop unit. It's an oscillating benchtop unit. It really works great. This is just to refine the shape. You can see I am throwing in some CA glue here and there because I have some voids, some spots. But you could do this with just a hand sander. You don't need a new special sander. Just clamp your piece down and just sand the edge. But having something that's mounted just makes it really quick to spin it around just to get a nice clean edge. Yeah, so there you go. Got a nice clean edge. Now let's talk about edge profiles. You could use a chamfer bit. Nice big chamfer bit or a massive round over bit to add some extra interest to these pieces. Not necessary, but some options, right? So here is this giant chamfer bit, and I'm just go ahead and adding a big chamfer to the bottom. And so this just kind of goes with that whole modern look. Got a big heavy chamfer on the bottom, and so this is a look you can go for. You're gonna need a giant bit to really give that effect, and so this is a bigger ½ inch beast of a chamfer bit. Works well, like with anything with routers, just small bits, small bites, 1/4 inch at a time, and you can see it's got this nice little edge there, and that's a look. So if that's a look you like, you're going for, go for the chamfer bit. That's an option. Of course, you don't even have to do router bits at all. You can just leave it flush to the bottom. That looks really cool too. But just want to show you the option of what it looks like if you wanted to do a big chamfer on the bottom. More traditional look would be a roundover. So you need a big roundover bit. So all of these bits, the exact ones linked to this bit and whatnot, it's down below if interested. But here I'm just adding a big roundover on the bottom. But here I want to show you what it looks like if you wanted to add a roundover on the top and bottom. So it's a nice curve, looks a little bit more like a bowl. This one's got a big roundover on the bottom and then a slight roundover on the top. So an option there. And this one just has the roundover on the bottom, and then it's flat on the top. So some different looks. So you can certainly play around with it, but it's a fun look. Okay, after you've done the router, I do recommend doing don't do hand sanding yet. Honestly, you can do a lot with the power sander. And so just a good clamping setup. I showed this earlier. This is my Armor tool bench with these inline clamps. They work amazing. Whatever clamping setup you have, just want to get it nice clamped in, but just starting with 80 grit sandpaper, you can really refine the look a lot. And so do it before hand sanding. Don't ask me why I'm saying that so much. It'll save you a lot of time. So some 80 grit. So I sanded all my bowls to 80 grit. And then eventually I worked my way up to 120 to 150 and then eventually 220. But I do recommend just using an orbital sander here just to kind of refine that round over look or that chamfer look or that straight look. Just get it nice and clean on the outside. As far as when you're sanding the inside, sometimes you just don't have enough room, depending on the size of your bowl and the height and your sander. And so once you're done sanding the outside, you might need a different tool to get on the inside. So here's just some options. I have this contour sander by Arbortech. It's awesome. And it works with an angle grinder. So it really worked well cleaning up the edges and it contours. It's a great tool and it's got the power. It's a corded angle grinder. So this really cleaned up my bottom of the bowl in no time. And so this is an option. Power carving's a lot of fun. Hopefully be doing some more content on that soon, but that's an option for cleaning up the bottom, or just a $20 attachment for your drill, right? Cheap. Super cheap. You have all the different thicknesses, there's foam attachments, and that can just help if you're having a hard time reaching the bottom with your sander. I do recommend one of these little drum sander units for a drill press. This unit again was 20 bucks. If you have a drill press, this is really helpful because this is the hardest part to sand, is that interior edge. And so working your way around, I did 80, 120, 150. And so you can certainly do this by hand. As you see here, there's a lot of hand sanding. That's just the nature of woodworking, and really to refine the look that you want and just to get a superb product. Hand sanding. So with hand sanding, I usually never start below 120 just because it's a little aggressive in those marks show. So I do 120, 150, 220, and doing it in between the power sanding. All right, raising the grain. So I'm spraying all of the bowls that are sanded with water. So I do this between 150 and 220 after I've sanded to 150 grit. So what you're doing, this is a cutting board step. Anything that comes in contact with water, you want to get wet, and this raises the grain of the wood. And because otherwise, when this bowl got washed for the first time, it would be all rough and scratchy, and it would be kind of a bummer for the recipient. So you just wet it, you get it all wet, make sure everything gets wet. You don't need to soak it, and then just dry it off and just let it sit out so the bowls can air dry. You don't want to do like extreme, like don't dry it in the sun to try and speed it up. Just get it wet, walk away for a couple hours, flip it over, make sure they're nice and dry, and then finish with 220 sanding again.
All right, so you sanded your bowls, ready for finish. Some choices here. First off, food safe finish. There's a lot of videos, a lot of info out on the interwebs. Really, all finishes are food safe once they've fully cured. So even the film finishes, if it's fully cured, it's food safe, right? Now, as far as, liability with selling things, all of that, if you want to be a little bit safer, that peace of mind, then, go with a finish that's actually labeled food grade or food safe. But really, most of your finishes should be fine. So you could certainly do a film finish. It's just going to be a little bit more labor intensive. It's going to take some time to cure, build up the coat, sand in between. So definitely your film finishes, plenty of other ones would work. This is a linseed oil, beeswax, tried and true. Some other, in this area where it's kind of like, not quite film finish, but it kind of gets that effect, but food safe, right? Because it's all, food safe things. Again, you want it to fully cure, but this takes time, right? 24 hours between coats. Or you can just treat it like a cutting board, right? So we've raised the grain, we've sanded it down, and then just, your cutting board finish. Mineral oil or wax. You can do a conditioner, you can do Odie's oil. For me, I'm going to treat it like a cutting board. I'm going to actually use walrus oil, cutting board oil, and wood wax. It's great, and that way maintenance is a little bit easier for the recipients. Just give them a little conditioner, but that's how I'm going to finish them. Any food option, any finish option works, but let's finish these boards. Bowls.
All right, so with the walrus oil, the cutting board oil, you just throw it in. Whatever oil you're using, just throw it in, apply it, let it sit for a while, maybe come back in a couple hours, reapply. Just depends, right? So with a mineral oil or cutting board finish, just know it's not going to fully quote unquote cure for a long time, right? It's going to sweat out some of that oil, but it looks beautiful, right? You can really see those colors come to life. My gosh, those figured woods really jump out, that purple heart, that curly maple. All right, after it's sat for a while, do want to dry it off just to make sure it's there. I like to use these scouring pads. So they're light. It's like basically a 4/0 steel wool, a synthetic steel wool. You could use 320 sandpaper. You're just trying to remove any extra fibers, just to get it extra smooth. Make sure all that oil gets in everywhere, nice and smooth. And once it's all relatively smooth again, then you're going to add the wax. Wax is super important. Wax is really what repels the water, especially with this type of finish. So I'm using walrus oil board wax. It's my favorite stuff. I just put it in this other jar. I reheated it, in a boiler just to make it a little bit easier to apply. You can make your own homemade stuff, but just to get a good wax on there and make sure it's applied everywhere. Let it sit. Doesn't need to sit super long. But once it's sat, you want to dry it off and buff it on in. So you could just use a shop towel like this. You could use those same, Scotch-Brite, scouring pads that aren't too abrasive, just to buff it in, get that nice sheen. And so, that wax is really important. You could do multiple coats of wax if you wanted to. One is sufficient. But I do like to send some extra wax and oil conditioner to the recipients just so they can maintain their board as well. You could also use a buffer. Orbital buffers are awesome and they really help get that sheen. But waxing is a really important step to get that final product looking awesome. So you can see it, right? They really turned out really rather well. It's those beautiful woods shine through. So make a great selection with your wood and have fun with it. Bowls without a lathe.
All right, there you have it. Wooden bowls with a router. Before we wrap this up and bring it on home, please consider subscribing. Lots more videos in the works. Another project similar to this coming up soon. Some of the same ideas. Some exciting things coming up. So subscribe to see more. But, a couple other things. Yes, there are so many more possibilities. Again, you can see just, hey, with a router bit, you can make it, but you can also do a lot of different edge profiles. One thing I want to say is my buddy Brad Ruff, I'll leave a link to his Instagram down below, Ruff Sees Woodwork. He's really the one who got me into this. He's been making some beautiful bowls. He calls them his latheless bowls. And he does a lot of power carving with it. So using different bits and different things to add texture to it. I didn't get it with this batch, but definitely using the ball gouge from Arbor Tech, some other things, adding some textural elements. So there's a lot of possibilities with this. So definitely explore. Check out my Instagram to see some more of this and some other sawdust shenanigans. But thanks for watching. Take care, and we'll catch you next time.